I was new in town, renting a small apartment in the shadow of a large hill. The locals told me the hill was cursed, but I brushed it off as small-town superstition. They whispered about a house that appeared at random on its slopes, a house that trapped those foolish enough to enter. I didn't believe them. I was too busy trying to build a life for myself to entertain ghost stories. But one night, as I drove home from a late shift, I saw it. The house was perched halfway up the hill, its silhouette sharp against the pale glow of the moon. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Curiosity tugged at me. Against my better judgment, I parked and climbed the hill, the dew-soaked grass chilling my ankles. The house loomed larger as I approached. It was old, Victorian in style, with peeling paint and darkened windows that seemed to watch me. When I reached the front steps, the door creaked open on its own. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was musty, and a faint scent of damp wood filled my nostrils. The entrance hall stretched ahead, dimly lit by a single flickering chandelier. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I noticed a mirror hanging on the wall. Its glass was cracked, and yet when I glanced at it, I saw more than my own reflection. Behind me, a shadow shifted, though the hallway was empty. I turned, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The sound of muffled voices echoed through the house, growing louder as I ventured deeper. They overlapped, whispering and laughing, but I couldn't understand a word. Each step I took felt like a mistake, yet I couldn't stop myself. The corridor twisted unnaturally, stretching longer the farther I walked. Doors lined the walls, some open, revealing nothing but darkness, others locked tight. I tried turning back, but the path behind me had changed. The front door was gone. Panic set in, but I pressed on, desperate to find an exit. I came to another mirror, this one larger, its frame ornate and gilded. My reflection wasn't right. It moved slower than I did, its eyes trailing behind mine as if it were a separate thing entirely. When I lifted my hand, the reflection hesitated, then smiled at me. I stumbled away, only to hear the echoes of my own footsteps coming toward me. Turning a corner, I froze. I was walking toward myself. Not just a reflection or a doppelganger, another me, mirroring every move I had just made moments ago. My other self paused, raised a hand, and whispered, "Don't follow." But I did. The house twisted further, its corridors looping endlessly. I passed the same faded painting of a storm-tossed sea at least 3 times. A grandfather clock ticked loudly in a room I was sure I had already been in. The voices grew louder, clearer. "Stay," they urged. "You're safe here." I tried every door I passed, but they either led to walls or opened onto empty voids. My sense of time dissolved. I wasn't sure if I had been in the house for hours or days. I stopped feeling hungry or tired. It was as if the house fed on my confusion. Finally, I found a staircase spiraling down. It led to a vast room with no windows, only mirrors. They lined the walls, floor, and ceiling, reflecting a million versions of me, each one slightly off. Some of them stood still while I moved. Others laughed soundlessly. One pressed its hand to the glass, its lips moving silently. "Run!" I turned to leave, but the staircase was gone. I was trapped in the mirrored room. The whispers grew deafening, overlapping until they became a single voice. "You're part of it now." When I woke up, I was lying on the hill, staring up at the night sky. The house was gone, and my car was parked exactly where I had left it. But something felt wrong. When I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, it smiled before I did. Now, every time I pass that hill, I see the house again. It's waiting for me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mirrors, endless versions of myself staring, smiling, waiting. My reflection in the bathroom sink didn't match my movements. When I turned off the light, I swore I heard a faint laugh echoing in the darkness. By morning, I convinced myself it was a stress-induced hallucination. That's what people do when reality bends in ways they can't explain. We rationalize, compartmentalize, pretend it's fine. But the pull of the house lingered, gnawing at me like a splinter in my mind. The next night, I made a choice I still can't justify. I had to go back. The hill was shrouded in mist, the moon an eerie blur above. The house was there again, as though it had never left. Its outline seemed softer, more inviting this time, like it had been waiting just for me. I hesitated at the front steps. Something about the air was wrong. It was too still, too heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. When I reached for the door, it swung open again, creaking as if to say, "Welcome back." The house had changed. The corridors were wider, stretching into impossible distances. The walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. The voices returned clearer now, whispering words I couldn't quite piece together. "Home," they murmured. "Stay with us." "Why leave?" The first mirror I passed showed me walking the halls from a different angle, like it had been watching me before I arrived. My reflection turned its head, staring at me with an expression I didn't recognize, some mix of fear and longing. I walked faster. The house was no longer just a maze, it was shifting around me. A doorway appeared where there had been only wallpaper moments before. I stepped through and found myself in the same room I had just left. I kept walking. Another door opened, leading to a narrow staircase spiraling upward. As I climbed, the steps groaned beneath me, their sound blending with the whispers. When I reached the top, I found myself in the mirrored room again. This time, the reflections weren't just me. I saw strangers, dozens of them, people I had never met but somehow recognized. They were frozen in the glass, their faces twisted in silent terror. A man in a tattered suit, a woman clutching a child who wasn't there, an elderly figure with hollow eyes. One by one, they began to move, their hands pressing against the glass, their mouths forming soundless pleas. "Let us out." The mirrors cracked, spiderweb fissures spreading across their surfaces. The reflections began to merge, faces overlapping until they became one, a single, monstrous shape that pressed against the glass from the other side. The whispering voices united, booming through the room. "Stay." I ran. The mirrors shattered as I fled, their shards scattering like razors across the floor. The house warped around me, corridors folding into themselves. Every turn led me back to that same staircase or a hallway that stretched into infinity. At one point, I opened a door and froze. It was my apartment. I could see myself sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, except the image wasn't quite right. The walls were too dark, the windows boarded up. The version of me in the room looked gaunt, hollow, barely alive. When I stepped through the door, I was back in the house. I screamed, pounding my fists against the walls, but they absorbed the sound, leaving only silence. The house wasn't just a structure, it was alive, and I was caught inside it. Eventually, I found a room with no mirrors, no doors, just a single window. Outside, the hill stretched out, and I could see my car parked below. I yelled for help, but no sound escaped. The window wasn't a window at all. It was another mirror, and this time, the reflection showed the truth. I was in the house. But the house, it wasn't on the hill anymore. It wasn't anywhere. It had vanished, taking me with it. The house wasn't on the hill. It wasn't anywhere. I don't know how long I stood in front of the window, mirror, staring at the reflection of my car on the hill, untouched by time or decay. The grass around it swayed gently in a wind I couldn't feel. Inside the house, there was no breeze, no temperature at all. Just nothing. I turned away, and the window rippled like water before settling back into smooth glass. The reflection of my car disappeared, replaced by the endless void of the room. "Why fight?" a voice whispered behind me, soft but insistent. I turned sharply, but no one was there. "Why leave?" The voice came again, this time from the walls. It wasn't one voice anymore but many, overlapping in a cacophony of desperation and mockery. They came from everywhere, and nowhere. I ran blindly, navigating the impossible corridors by instinct alone. The house had become more aggressive. The walls closed in, forcing me down tighter paths. Doors slammed before I could reach them. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as though it might dissolve at any moment. And the mirrors, they were everywhere now. Every turn brought me face to face with my reflection, but it was never just me. Shadows flickered behind the glass, their movements unnatural and jerky, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Sometimes I saw my face twist into an expression I'd never made, eyes wide, mouth stretched in a grin that didn't belong to me. The house whispered my name, drawing me forward. I stumbled into a room that was horrifying in its simplicity, a single chair and a table in the center, with an old rotary phone resting on it. The phone began to ring. I stared at it, paralyzed. The sound was wrong, distorted, like it was being played through a broken speaker. The voices began to chant, louder now. Answer. 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 Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I picked up the receiver. Hello? At first, there was nothing. Just static. Then, faintly, I heard my own voice. Why did you come back? My blood ran cold. Who is this? I asked, though I already knew. The voice on the line sighed, and I swear I felt it, like a breath against the back of my neck. You can't leave, it said, echoing the voices in the walls. You're part of it now. Just like us. The line went dead. I dropped the phone and turned to flee, but the door was gone. The walls began to ripple and shift, the air thickening like tar. The table and chair sank into the floor, vanishing as though they had never been there. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the house. I stumbled backward and collided with something solid. A mirror. The reflection stared back at me, its grin impossibly wide. It lifted its hand, pressing it against the glass. Let me out, it mouthed silently. The room dissolved into darkness, and I was falling into nothingness, the house's whispers wrapping around me like chains. When I hit the ground, I was back on the hill, sprawled in the dew-soaked grass. The house was gone, the slope barren as though it had never been there. My car sat where I'd left it, untouched, waiting. I stumbled to my feet and climbed into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. But something wasn't right. The dashboard clock blinked midnight, over and over. The radio crackled with static, faint whispers threading through it. In the rearview mirror, my reflection stared back at me, its expression hollow. I drove. The town was just as I'd left it, quiet, ordinary. But when I tried to find my apartment, the streets twisted in unfamiliar ways. Every turn brought me back to the same intersection, the same dead end. I finally stopped in front of a convenience store, desperate for answers. The clerk looked up as I stumbled inside, his face pale. You okay, buddy? He asked. I think so. Can you tell me how to get to Westbrook Apartments? He frowned. Westbrook? That complex burned down 5 years ago. Everyone who lived there, they didn't make it. I stared at him, my mouth dry. That can't be right, I whispered. I live there. The clerk's expression darkened. Maybe you should sit down. You don't look so good. In the glass of the freezer door behind him, I saw my reflection again. It wasn't me anymore. Its grin stretched ear to ear, and it whispered 2 words. Welcome home. I stumbled out of the convenience store, the clerk's concerned voice fading behind me. My reflection in the freezer glass was burned into my mind, a grotesque grin that felt too real to dismiss. The streetlights hummed faintly in the night, their light barely cutting through the thick mist that had begun to roll in. I drove aimlessly, desperate to find something familiar. But the town seemed wrong. Streets I'd known like the back of my hand now twisted into unfamiliar routes. Shops and landmarks were out of place, like pieces of a puzzle forced together incorrectly. My car radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. A voice, distorted and static-laden, spoke a single phrase. Turn back. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The road ahead stretched into darkness, flanked by trees that seemed to lean closer with every passing moment. My hands gripped the wheel as I debated what to do. The radio crackled again. This time, it was my voice. You're almost there. I nearly laughed, but it came out as a choked sob. Turning back wasn't an option. I didn't even know where back was anymore. The road narrowed, the asphalt giving way to gravel, then dirt. The mist thickened until it felt like I was driving through a dream. And then, just ahead, the silhouette of a house appeared. It was the house. The same Victorian monstrosity that had vanished from the hill now sat at the end of this impossible road. Its windows glowed faintly, like eyes watching me approach. I should have turned around. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body moved on autopilot. I parked the car and stepped out, the air around me heavy and damp. The house's front door was ajar, just as it had been the first time. Inside, the whispers greeted me like old friends. "Welcome back. Why did you leave? You belong here." The entryway was the same as before, but something had changed. The air felt alive, humming with anticipation. Mirrors lined the walls, and in each one my reflection moved just a fraction of a second slower than me, its eyes tracking mine with an unsettling intensity. I turned a corner and found myself face to face with a figure. It was me. Not a reflection, but an exact copy, standing in the middle of the hallway. Its face was pale, its eyes hollow, but its grin, that grin was inhuman. "Why are you here?" it asked, its voice a distorted echo of mine. I backed away, but the figure stepped forward, mimicking my movements. "You shouldn't have left," it whispered. I turned and ran, the corridor stretching endlessly before me. Doors appeared and disappeared, the walls pulsating like they were alive. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a deafening roar. "Stay with us! You can't leave! It's home now!" I burst into a room that shouldn't have existed, a grand ballroom, its floor cracked and rotting, its chandeliers swaying as though caught in an invisible wind. Mirrors lined the walls, but this time, they didn't show me. They showed the others. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Faces frozen in terror, their mouths open in silent screams. Some clawed at the glass, their eyes pleading. Others stood still, as though they had given up long ago. "Help us!" they mouthed in unison. I stumbled back, colliding with something solid. Turning, I found the figure again, my doppelganger, its grin wider than before. "You're not leaving," it said. "Not this time." The mirrors shattered, shards flying through the air, slicing into my skin. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the house. The floor gave way beneath me, and I fell into darkness. When I woke, I was back in my car, parked on the side of the road. The house was gone, the road behind me leading to nowhere but empty woods. I tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. My phone had no signal. And then I saw it, in the rearview mirror. The house was behind me, closer than ever. Its windows glowed like eyes, its front door creaking open. A voice whispered in my ear, soft and mocking. "You can't escape." I turned to look, but the house was gone. Now, no matter where I go, I see it. In the reflection of shop windows, in puddles on the street, in the corners of my vision when I turned too quickly. It's waiting, pulling me back piece by piece. And I'm terrified, because deep down, I know the truth. I never left. They say you can't outrun your past, but I wasn't just running from memories, I was running from it. The house haunted me everywhere. In reflections, in shadows, in moments of silence when I thought I was alone. It wasn't bound to the hill anymore. It was everywhere. I tried moving cities, changing my routine, surrounding myself with people, but nothing worked. Every night I'd see it again. Sometimes in dreams, dark corridors stretching infinitely, mirrors showing not just me but things behind me. Other times, it was more tangible. I'd turn a corner in the street and see its peaked roof just a block away. But no one else ever saw it. "Are you feeling okay?" friends would ask when they caught me staring at empty space, trembling. How could I explain it to them? How could I put into words the way it watched me, how the whispers followed me? The worst part was the time loops. It started subtly. I'd leave my apartment and find myself stepping out of it again seconds later, as if I'd never left. Conversations would repeat, exactly word for word, with no one else noticing. I'd go to sleep only to wake up in the same position, at the exact same moment I'd closed my eyes, over and over. Then it escalated. One night, I locked my door and turned to grab my jacket from the couch. When I turned back, I was in the house's front hall, staring into a cracked mirror. The reflection wasn't me, it was my doppelganger. The grin stretched too wide, the eyes too hollow. "You're wasting time," it said, the words spilling from its mouth like oil. I stumbled back, and suddenly, I was in my bed again, gasping for air. My clock blinked 12 o'clock, as it always did now. The house wasn't just following me. It was rewriting me. I tried to resist it. I burned sage, called priests, researched ancient rituals, anything to break its grip. But nothing worked. It wasn't something that could be exorcised or banished. It was too deeply entwined, not just in my life but in the world. Then came the night everything changed. I woke to find myself standing in a corridor of the house, barefoot, the cold wooden floor biting into my skin. The air hummed, alive with whispers, but this time, they were louder, more urgent. "Stay. Leave. Help us." It was as though the house itself was arguing. I walked forward, though I couldn't feel my legs moving. The hallway stretched and twisted, doors appearing and vanishing as I passed. Mirrors lined the walls, each one showing a different version of me, some screaming, some weeping, some grinning that impossibly wide grin. At the end of the corridor was a door I had never seen before. It pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. "Go through," the voices hissed, harmonizing in a dreadful, melodic chant. My hand moved on its own, gripping the cold brass handle. The door creaked open, revealing a void of pure blackness. I stepped inside. The darkness swallowed me, and for a moment, I was weightless, suspended in nothingness. Then the whispers returned, louder than ever, screaming over each other, overlapping until they formed one voice, my voice. "You're not escaping. You're becoming." I fell, my stomach lurching as the void gave way to light. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on the hill again, the house before me. But this time, it was different. The house wasn't watching me anymore. I was watching it. I stepped forward, and the door opened as if it had been waiting. The halls felt familiar, comfortable, like I belonged. When I passed the mirror, I saw my reflection smile, not the grotesque grin, but a real smile, calm and knowing. This time, I didn't run. This time, I wasn't the victim. The house is quiet now, the whispers subdued, waiting for someone else to find their way inside. And they will. They always do. Because the house doesn't disappear. It moves. And now, so do I doubt it's strange how quickly the unfamiliar can feel like home. I don't know how long I've been here now. Time doesn't flow in the house like it does outside. Minutes stretch into hours, hours collapse into seconds. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm part of it, and it's part of me. At first I fought it. I wandered the endless halls, desperate to find a way out. The mirrors tormented me, showing lives I might have lived, versions of myself happy, whole, unbroken. But eventually I realized the truth, those reflections weren't possibilities. They were bait. The house feeds on longing, on regret, on hope. It lures you in with promises of answers, closure, escape. And once it has you, it never lets go. But something changed when I accepted it. The mirrors stopped tormenting me. They became windows, portals to the lives of others. I saw people like me, lost, desperate, unaware that they were being drawn toward the house. Some fought the pull. Most didn't. The corridors became familiar, the whispers clearer. They weren't random. They were memories, fragments of the souls trapped here. And now, I was one of them. The house gave me purpose. I became its caretaker, its emissary, its voice. At first, I resisted that too. I didn't want to be a part of the cycle, to lure others into this living nightmare. But the house doesn't ask, it commands. And so, I began to play my role. I watched the next victim approach, their silhouette hazy in the mist. A young man, his face pale with the exhaustion of a life that hadn't been kind. He stopped at the base of the hill, staring up at the house with the same mixture of fear and curiosity I'd felt that first night. I wanted to warn him, to scream at him to turn back. But the house wouldn't let me. Instead, I stood in the doorway, my figure shadowed and indistinct, a flickering shape to draw him closer. He hesitated, but only for a moment. As he climbed the hill, I felt the house shift around me, its walls pulsing with anticipation. The whispers rose, not chaotic this time but deliberate, welcoming. "Come inside," they beckoned. "You'll find what you're looking for." The man stepped onto the porch, his face lit by the pale glow of the moon. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the same terror I had felt when I first crossed this threshold. I stepped aside, letting him enter. The door creaked shut behind him, and the house came alive. The corridors stretched, the mirrors flickered, and the whispers grew louder. The house began its work, weaving its spell, pulling him deeper into its labyrinth. I followed silently, watching as he wandered the endless halls, calling out for help. He found the first mirror, and I saw his reflection grin before he did. It always starts the same. But something was different this time. As he moved deeper into the house, he turned suddenly, his eyes locking onto mine. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady. I froze. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. They were always too consumed by fear, too overwhelmed by the house's illusions. "You were like me once," he continued, stepping closer. "You don't have to stay here. You don't have to be part of this." The house hissed around us, its walls shuddering in anger. The mirrors cracked, and the whispers rose to a deafening roar. "Silence him," the house demanded, its voice reverberating through my mind. I wanted to obey. I wanted to drive him away, to push him deeper into the labyrinth. But for the first time, I hesitated. "You're not the house," the man said. "You can leave. You just have to let go." The house screamed, its fury shaking the very ground beneath us. But I felt something else, something stronger. Hope. I stepped toward the man, ignoring the house's protests, and together we ran. The corridors twisted and fought to contain us, but I knew their tricks now. I led him through the maze, past the mirrors and shadows, until we reached the front door. It stood open, the night air pouring in. "Go," I said, shoving him forward. He hesitated, glancing back at me. "You can come with me," he said. But I couldn't. The house's grip was still too strong. "Just go," I repeated. He stepped through the door, and for a moment I thought I might follow. But as he crossed the threshold, the house pulled me back, its walls closing in around me. I fell to the floor, gasping, as the door slammed shut. The man was gone. But something had changed. The house was weaker now, its whispers quieter. I could feel its rage, but also its fear. For the first time, someone had escaped. And for the first time, I knew I could, too. One day, I'll find my way out. And when I do, I'll make sure the house never takes anyone again.